the staff, I mean, they're the ones that filter the phone calls. They're the ones that say, well, so-and-so called, he was really upset, you should call him right back. Or they're the ones that can sit on the message and say, well, yeah, you had 20 messages and I didn't think it was important. So it is, to have the staffer on your side, or at least understand your issue, because we get very busy sometimes, and when we have to make a call, when you have to make a decision about something, I'll holler over at my staff who's sitting over at the other desk and goes, hey, what's the bottom line? What am I doing here? And they'll say, well, Megan says you should do this on healthcare, and the insurance company says you should do this on healthcare, so who are you going to go with? And then I'll say, well, what's the bottom line? What do you think? And then they'll say, well, where's Megan on healthcare? So, you know, the fact that Megan's been talking to her and giving her all the data, and, you know, inviting her to all the events where we bring speakers to talk about healthcare and the need for it, you know, and I already know that, you know, 45% of my district is medically indigent. I already know that, you know, we need healthcare that is not employer-based. I already know that there needs to be some sort of healthcare for all program, not just in the state, but in the country. So that helps, the fact that I already know, but the fact that I have to make a decision about something, and my staffer's been hanging out with Megan about healthcare, about this question, whatever the question is, helps me make that decision.
I want to leave plenty of time for audience participation, so this will be my last question. And I'd like to open it up to those of you in the audience, and we'll ask Scott and Ricardo to share a microphone so we could have a microphone rove. Lobbyists and advocates have received, have been unfortunately negatively stereotyped because of the role of money in lobbying. I'm hoping that each panelist could say a word or two about that. I've talked with folks who believe, you know, I don't contribute to that candidate's campaign, so therefore I don't have any access, or they're not going to take my phone call, they're not going to respond to my letter. I'm hoping that each panelist could say a word or two about the role of money in access and advancing your cause.
Speaking from a nonprofit perspective, we have limited resources, and we do not pay or give money to anyone for political contributions. It's not allowed. So the role that we try to play in counteracting those lobbyists who do have a lot of money and a lot of clout and a lot of power in Springfield is to try to counteract that with people power. And it's not an easy thing to do, but the more and more people that we have fill this auditorium are people that have power to influence their legislators. And you know, many people in the world may be cynical about what one person's voice can do, but I've dedicated my life at this point to try to be working against that and trying to empower people, and in trying to influence the legislator to say, you know, there are many people in your district that don't have health care, and you need to listen to us, and you can't just close your ears and say, oh, health care is too expensive, so I'm just going to keep saying that no one cares about health care reform. No, that's our role as the public, to put pressure on that publicly elected official to say we need to have a change. And so I don't have a lot to say about those lobbyists with a lot of money, but that it's important to try to counteract them as much as we can.
And Megan appropriately applied the Q equals A plus 1. I'd like to invite Scott and Ricardo to address the question if they wish.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. I think it was the first meeting that I was at in City Hall. I sit in the back row, and immediately after the meeting was over, a whole bunch of hands came across the aisle there, and it was all lobbyists sticking their cards across trying to get to me. And so that was my first experience with that.
They don't bite.
The second one I figured out was actually in my ward, the lobbyists are all developers. And the first guy that came into my office the day after the election, I saw him pacing outside, and I thought, oh, it's a constituent, has some kind of question, you know, I'll go out there and bring him on in. And I brought him on in, and he started talking, and I quickly realized he was a developer looking for, you know, some type of quid pro quo, and he quickly was shoved out the office. But I haven't really run into too many situations yet, other than working with developers who I think are willing to work with the community, work with the elected officials, and ones that haven't been able to do that. Just the last couple of weeks, I don't have a problem pushing them out the door, because constituents really have to be our first priority, and I guess I should say a part of the reason I was elected was because the people were made a second priority. So we have to focus on what issues affect people on a daily basis, and if we don't, then we see what happens. So, and it goes back to talking about the letters, talking about the emails, the phone calls. You really have to focus in on that. You have to reach out to your elected officials, no matter what level they're at, whether it's school board, park district board, alderman, state representative. You have to reach out to each one of them, because as they go up the chain, as I mentioned, I speak with my state rep quite often, probably more so than alderman, just because within the ward I've tried to figure out what issues are affecting them, and issues like the education, health care. I get those same questions from people, and I have to know what they're thinking and make sure that we're all on the same page.
I'm not defending lobbyists, but they're not all that bad. In terms of, it's kind of like I tell a story about how I don't like to be called a politician, because a politician, the word politician is kind of bantered around the way the lobbyist word is used. But there has to be a clear, as Scott mentioned, a clear understanding that there is no quid pro quo. Campaigns are expensive. I mean, I'll tell you that right now, because it costs money to put up posters. It costs money to, volunteers are not free. It costs money to buy ads in the papers, and getting elected does have its costs. So as elected officials, we then have to basically raise money, and sometimes that money comes from people who have an interest in the district that we represent. So the understanding has to be clear that there is no quid pro quo, that all sides will be considered equally, and you'll listen to the pros and cons of whatever project or whatever position that they're urging you to take. And Megan hit it right on the head. I mean, it's about being able to demonstrate that, you know, that person might have contributed to a campaign and he might have access to the elected official, but we represent, you know, 200 of his constituents, or we can harness 300 phone calls into that elected official's office within a week, and that is people power. I mean, that's what, at the end of the day, elected officials measure to make their decisions. So these lobbyists, as they try, I mean, there's an ugly underbelly to every industry, to every type of business, and in politics, you know, that quid pro quo lobbyist is one of the ugliest ones. Abramoff just demonstrated that down in Texas, and we see what that's produced with the first vice presidential chief of staff that ever got convicted. I don't mean to get political here, but it's part of the underbelly of politics. And we as elected officials and you as advocates need to understand that some of us aren't that bad. And that it is what Megan talked about, is your ability to produce bodies, phone calls, emails, letters, have more influence than a lobbyist's phone call, even though they might have contributed to a campaign.
Terrific, and I agree with your view about the word politician.